Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I thought I would share with you a cool IKEA hack using repurposed IKEA bed slates. So guys, I had these bed slates from an old bed that I was putting away, and I thought these slates would be ideal for a DIY project. So let's go ahead and get started and see what I have got in store for you. So for this first project, I thought I would show you guys how we could put these bed slates to use into making DIY dominoes. So guys, to start off this project, I went ahead and cut my bed slates into 2 cm strips. At this stage guys, you could go ahead and cut these bed slates to any size you wish. Afterwards, I went ahead and used my orbital sander and sanded all of my slates. I went ahead and repeated this sanding process on all of my strips of wood. Once I was done with my sanding, I used a rag and wiped them down clean. Next, I wanted to give my dominoes a bit of an aged look, so I decided to go ahead and give it a bit of a stain. Here I'm using a Rust-Oleum glaze in the color Java Brown. So guys, at this stage you could leave these slates as it is or use any type of glaze or stain you already got in hand. However guys, I would advise you not to go ahead and paint this at this stage because it will be a bit of a task for the next step. You would see in a little bit why. Next, I went ahead and repeated the staining process on all of my slates and set it aside to dry. Couple of hours later, my domino slates are all dry and ready for its next step. So guys, for this next step, I thought I would go ahead and use a wood burning tool to score my lines and dots onto my domino slates. However guys, at this stage, if you do not have a wood burning tool, you could always stencil it or draw it on using a Sharpie pen. Next, using a ruler, I went ahead and marked the center of my wood slate. Afterwards guys, I went ahead and used my wood burning tool and scored my lines onto my domino slates. So guys, remember I asked you not to paint these slates because at this stage, when you are trying to score it using your wood burning tool, if it was painted, it would be very hard to score it. I went ahead and repeated the scoring process on all of my domino slates. So guys, I just wanted to say to be very careful that you don't burn yourself when using a wood burning tool because the tip of it could be very hot. Now my scoring on my domino slates are all done and it's ready for its next step. Next, I went ahead and used a pen and numbered all of my dominoes and prepped it for its next step. I went ahead and repeated this numbering process on all of my dominoes. Once you're done numbering your dominoes, it should look something like this. Afterwards, once again, I went ahead and used my wood burning tool and burnt in circles to form my numbers on my domino strips. I went ahead and repeated this burning process until I got to the very end of my domino strips. Now my dominoes are all done. Next, I went ahead and used an IKEA basket which I've already got in hand and placed all of my dominoes in. So guys, this is how my dominoes turned out. It looks so great and it's perfect for my coffee table as a decorative item. Hope you guys like it too. So guys, let's go ahead and get started on our second project, a decorative farmhouse themed wall hanging. So to start off this project, I went ahead and cut my bed slates into strips to form a square. I repeated this process and I cut just enough strips to form 4 squares. Next, I went ahead and used 5 strips of wood and I formed my square as you can see. Afterwards, once I was done forming my square, I used Gorilla Wood glue and I glued my square in place. Next, I went ahead and repeated this gluing process, forming all 4 of my squares. So guys, as you can see, I decided to glue my squares and stack them on top of each other and set it aside to dry. I went ahead and repeated the stacking process, and I found it much easier to set it aside to dry because all I needed to do was just place one set of weights on it. Couple of hours later, my square frames are now dry and ready for its next step. So guys, once my frames were all dry, I decided to go ahead and use my nail gun to stamp in some nails to secure it in place. Afterwards, I went ahead and put on my safety gear, and using my nail gun, I stamped in some nails on the back strip of my frame. However guys, at this stage, if you do not have a nail gun, you could totally skip this process because as it is quite sturdy. I repeated this process on all 4 of my frames and prepped it for its next step. Next, I went ahead and used my orbital sander and gave all 4 of my frames a slight sanding. Afterwards, I used the damp rag and wiped them down clean. Now my frames are all prepped and it's ready for a coat of paint. Here I'm using a sample pot of paint which I've already got in hand. So guys, I highly recommend you go get yourself a sample pot of paint from your local hardware store. It is an inexpensive way to go about with your projects, and you can also choose a variety of color. Next, I went ahead and gave one generous coat of paint on all 4 of my frames and set it aside to dry. Couple of hours later, my frames are all dry and ready for its next step. Next, using my orbital sander, I went ahead and gave this a slight sanding because I wanted it to have that rustic look. However guys, you could totally skip this sanding process if you like this clean look. Once I was done with all of my sanding, I wiped it down clean and I prepped it for its next step. Next, since I was going to use these frames from my laundry room, I went ahead and cut out some words using my Cricut machine that says wash, dry, fold and repeat. At this stage guys, you could use these frames for any type of wording you wish. Afterwards, I went ahead and applied my words onto the center of my frame. However guys, if you do not have a Cricut machine, you could always stencil this onto the frame. I repeated this process and I went ahead and applied all of my words onto my frames. Now my frames are all done, but I wanted to give this a bit of a rustic look, and I decided to go ahead and stain the edge of it to get that desired look I'm after. Here I'm using a Rust-Oleum glaze which I've already got in hand that I applied onto the edge of my frames and wiped it down clean. Here's a look of the before and after, and I definitely like the after look. Once my frames were all done, I went about using command strips at the back of my frame to hang them on my wall. However, at this stage, you could also use picture hanging hooks to hang them on your wall. So guys, this is how my farmhouse inspired wall hangings turned out, and I love how it looks in my laundry room. Hope you guys like it too. Project number 3, simple and easy to do, wooden decorative tray. So guys, to start off this project, I went ahead and cut out my bed slates to size to form a box. Next, I placed 2 slates together and glued them down using Gorilla Wood glue to form my base. Afterwards, I went ahead and cut out 2 more slates to the width of my base and glued it onto my base. Once I was done gluing my base, I set it aside to dry. A couple of minutes later, my base is all dry. Afterwards, I went ahead and put on my safety gear, and using my nail gun, I stamped in some nails at the back of my base to make it more sturdier. Now my base is all done, and now it's time to build around it to form my box. Next, I went ahead and cut out 2 slates to fit the length of my base and 2 slates to fit the width of my base. Afterwards, using Gorilla Wood glue, I went ahead and glued all 4 sides onto my base to form a box. Once I was done gluing all 4 sides, I used my clamps and clamped them down and set it aside to dry. A couple of hours later, my box is all dry and it's ready for its next step. Afterwards, I went ahead and put on my safety gear, and using my nail gun, I nailed in the sides of my box to make it more sturdier. At this stage guys, if you do not have a nail gun, you could always hammer in some nails. Now my box tray is almost done, but next we are going to give it a bit of a sanding. Here I'm using my orbital sander to give it a bit of a sanding, but at this stage if you do not have an orbital sander, you could always do it manually. After I was done with all of my sanding, I used the damp rag and wiped it down clean. Next, I wanted to give this tray a whitewash finish, so here I'm using some sample paints which I've already got in hand to get that effect I'm after. I gave this tray a generous coat of paint and set it aside to dry. So guys, now my tray is all dry, but it looked too white and bright, but I was going for a more rustic look, so I gave it a bit of a sanding to get that desired look I'm after. Once I was done sanding, I used the damp rag and wiped it down clean. Next, I wanted to give this tray some handles, so I went ahead and used my drill and drilled in some holes under the side of my tray to tie in some handles. I went ahead and repeated this drilling process on both sides of my tray. Once I was done, I went ahead and gave the sides a bit of a sanding to take any rough edges off. Next, I went ahead and used some jute twine which I've already got in hand, looped it through and formed my handles. I went ahead and repeated this process on either side of my tray. Now my tray is all done and it's the perfect little decorative piece for my bathroom. Hope you guys like it.